Hi, Zevi. Thanks for joining us today. Um, I'd love it if you could give us a bit of background about who you are, your career, what's led you to your current role at Livecycle today.
Okay, Oliver. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for
Nice.
having me. Always great to talk to other smart people in the space about what we do. My name is Zevi. I'm based out of Israel. I'm currently founding head of marketing at a startup called Livecycle. We are a dev-focused dev tools company that we're building collaboration tools for developers. And I joined this company about 2 years ago to kind of 0 to 1, build our marketing apparatus and develop a go-to-market strategy together
Okay.
with the CEO, with our team. Before that, I've been in a number of product and marketing centric. So sometimes it was more product focused, sometimes it was more marketing centric roles in a couple of companies that had some really interesting opportunities to roll products out for big companies like mobile apps for Verizon and Sprint, working with things like AWS and Facebook on a number of things. And then the life cycle, like the other end of the spectrum with PLG 0 to 1 kind of early stage startup. So had a really interesting range. And in addition, I'll just mention is I really enjoy talking to other companies and other organizations. So I've also developed kind of a portfolio of clients that I advise in terms of all kinds of go-to-market, needs and challenges that they're facing.
Amazing. So you're my go-to-market specialist. One of the things I'm really keen to talk to you about today is product launches. It's a really big theme that comes up in a lot of the different interviews and conversations I have with people working in product marketing is how to approach the product launch. And I was wondering if you could start off by just explaining a little bit about product launches and the different kind of categories of product launches that exist and why it's crucial to kind of differentiate between them.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think the first thing just to emphasize, and as with most things in marketing, I find that sometimes the most obvious sounding things are the most profound. And a lot of us think about them or think about them partially, but we don't necessarily articulate them. So it helps to kind of slow it down and just talk it out. What is a product launch, right? I mean, if you're involved in tech and you're involved in building features, so you're releasing stuff all the time. You could be opening up 10, 20. I just spoke to a company last week that says they're managing up to 30 or 40 pull requests a day in a bigger company with them. So what's the difference between a release and a launch? I don't know if I could put you on the spot. What would you say just offhand, if I'm releasing 10 fixes a day, what's the difference, conceptually between a release and a launch?
Yes, I mean, whenever I've approached product launches in the past, I've typically clustered features into effectively storytelling narratives. When you can tell a story about what your product is doing, and that could be a combination of lots of different features that are all doing very different things, but working towards a common purpose. Those are the things that I tend to cluster into launches. And I would probably think about grading those from an initial product launch, which is like an MVP of a product or a proposition, where you've got a very clear vision and an idea of what that product's going to do, versus kind of augmentations to that might come later on.
Yeah, I think
it's kind of how.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I guess even to zoom out one step further, the way that I like to think about it is that a release is a product-centric activity, right? It's like I'm focused on the product and improving the product and iterating because it's a fix or a patch or whatever. And that's something which the end result is to improve the product or the product experience.
Sure.
As opposed to a launch where the goal there, it could include a actual release, maybe yes, maybe no, but the goal that we're trying to achieve with this thing that we call a launch is some sort of marketing-centric, announcement-centric, attention-generating activity. So that's really the first distinction, is that it's like when it comes to any launch of a feature or a product, what are you trying to achieve? Are you just trying to release an upgrade to your product and you want the product to be better? Or is this a deliberate set of steps that you're using to generate awareness or attention and traffic from the outside, as any kind of marketing activity would? So it's a subtle distinction, but it's a really important distinction because launches in general are, I think, a tool that can be used for what they're intended to be used for. And in this case, it's more it's a marketing centric activity to get attention, get awareness. and to drive that kind of result from your target audience.
Can you talk a little bit about timeframes there? Because I guess the timeframes for a product release versus a product launch are inherently different, especially when you're framing your product launch around you trying to build awareness. And can you talk to me about how you think about the timescales of each of those kind of activities, especially for the product launch side of base?
So I think a lot of our conversation over the next bit is going to really come back to the same central axis, because I think when it comes to launches, anything that has to do with product or marketing in general, you run the risk of running around not knowing exactly where you're going. And if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of marketers, feel that way. There's a million different factors, a million different considerations. It's not always a linear 1, 2, 3 step process. So the question is, always trying to, as my dad likes to say, simplify. Just how do we boil things down to their core components to give us a framework for thinking about any given situation? So you talked about, cadence or scheduling or whatever.
Right.
I think the best way to frame it is to think about what are the different types of launches that we might, be encountering, because really one depends on the other. How often you launch, how you launch, what you end up doing, all the questions that we're probably going to touch on. It really depends on what is the type or category of launch. And the way I think about it, I don't think I made this up. I mean, I think a lot of people thinking this way. But I think about it as basically boiling down to probably 3 main categories of launch or types of launches. Let's say type 1 would just be some sort of marginal improvement. It's like I have a feature, I have an existing product, an existing user base. I just want to launch some sort of important but relatively marginal improvement to an existing product. Launch type 2 would be something which is more significant. It's still not necessarily like a mind-blowing, announcement. And type 3 would be like the really big deal, maybe actual product launches or company launches or, version launches that you really want to make a big splash. Now, what the significance of each of those 3 types of launches then starts to boil down to, what is the scope of the launch? Who are you trying to target? Who are you talking to? Who are the stakeholders that are going to be involved? So let's just give a quick, if you want, I'll give a quick example how some of this might play out. So let's just take that launch type 1, right? So let's say I have an existing product, existing set of users, and I am looking to launch something which is relatively mundane. So first, in terms of the funnel impact, where am I looking to? What is the actual intended result that I'm looking to get out of this? I'm not looking to necessarily use this launch as a huge influx of new users, right? No one's going to care that we, added this button or changed this thing or optimized this feature. That's not going to get me the top of funnel engagement for new users, but it might help us to get better results out of our existing users. Maybe they'll have better retention. Maybe the engagement will be better and more frequent because we've made something a little bit more pleasant for them within the user experience. Well, just having that context alone, you can already start to think through on your own of okay, now that I know that I'm targeting those people for this purpose, for this intended result, that already then begins to, go out a little bit in terms of ripple effect outward as far as who do I need to involve? How much time do I need? How much budget do I need? What kind of activities? And you can go through each one of these things, but that's the thing, as opposed to, just to finish the thought, a huge splash where you are looking to get that top of funnel attention, awareness, engagement. That would be, you can already start to think about, I'm going to need much more time. I need more budget. I'm going to need to position this and talk about this in a different way. It's not just going to be an in-product announcement. I might have some PR or some other things. So that's how I think I like to try to frame it, and then think through funnel impact, stakeholders, what channels, budget, et cetera, et cetera.
How much of that is defined by you based on your analysis of the situation? Like how much is kind of top down, kind of in position of we need a product launch around XYZ feature?
So it's a good question, and I think it's also it depends kind of question. And I think it happens, right? Because I think that in most organizations, or at least the companies that I've been in, hopefully it's like this in every healthy organization, marketing doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? You don't you could be the product owner, but you don't own anything, right? You're just, you have accountability for certain processes, but you always want to check in and understand, number one, obviously, what are the company goals? What are you trying to achieve with this? How does this tie into our ability to support? It could be that we have this really important feature, but the engineering support or the customer, success team is busy with something else. So maybe we need to adapt because whatever, a million different considerations. So there always has to be this multifaceted consideration for what it is. I think that, to answer your question succinctly, I think that it's any good product marketer or marketing leader would be best suited to come with an intelligent, confident proposal of, based on these inputs and these assumptions, I think that this is how we should roll it out, and then be able to have that healthy conversation with their peers.
Yeah. Don't be a passive bystander and let things happen to you, but really kind of drive the narrative of what kind of campaign you think you ought to be shaping. But can we reflect a little bit about how you measure success and what kind of realistic results you're looking for within a product launch? How do you approach that in terms of all the things you've just spoken about so far?
So that's also a really good question, and again, it depends. But I'm saying it depends simply in the context of the outline that we started to draw. So once we have a context, I think of what type of launch this is, and we know, okay, this is. So the first question we're asking ourselves is, what is it that we're trying to achieve?
Sure.
Right? So am I trying to achieve, improve the experience of the current users? Am I looking to activate kind of qualified leads that haven't converted? So I might have people that have signed up but never actually used the product, and here's an opportunity to show them they have a really cool feature that you can use to start using the product to get with you. Or maybe it's a really brand awareness type thing where I'm looking to drive demand for my product from a broad top of funnel source. Because I have a deliberate definition of what I'm trying to achieve, I can then correlate that to what I measure, right? So just to give a couple of specifics, if it's that type 1 launch where it's just like a marginal feature, I might look at product usage metrics. I might say, okay, I have a particular feature or whatever. How do I see, or can I measure the spike before and after of how a particular feature or part of the product is used? If it's like that type 2 launch where it's also focused on existing users, but it's a little bit more significant, I might look at that product activation or like the funnel optimization of how many signups are now re-engaging or some sort of retention metric. If it's like one of those type 3 high impact, high volume, top of funnel things, so then naturally the measurements are going to be shifted accordingly. So you might look at click-through rates on certain campaigns, or month over month spike in signups, or something like that shows you that this is resonating with the audience that you're talking to in a positive way.
Okay, yeah, so all the kind of top of funnel activity. Do you ever find that you ideally want to measure things in a more qualitative way? And can you talk to me about the challenges around that? I'm always consciously aware of, the hard stuff is easy, the soft stuff is hard.
I think that's always a challenge. I think that every I think the two play into each other, though, right? I think that focused quantity ends up being indicators of quality, in the sense that you can look at again, I don't want to get too bogged down on like specific examples.
Yeah, no.
But there's always a desire to try to figure out, I guess, how do we measure multiple parts of the process at the same time? So how do I make sure that I'm not only getting a bunch of leads to my site, but they're actually qualified leads, right? And the quality of those leads is going to be measured based on, the actions that they take.
Sure.
For example, just to give you a quick example, right? So in Livecycle, one of the recent experiments that we ran, or one of the metrics that we started to measure to kind of track kind of qualified leads coming into our site was, so obviously you want to look at, click-throughs and actual adoption of the product and actual sign up. But I noticed that you could also correlate leads, because we're such a dev-centric technical product. You could correlate lead quality by other types of activities. So let's say, for example, documentation engagement or search. So how many people coming in from a certain campaign are, even if they didn't click through to actually use the product, they're searching the documentation and spending a good looking there. So that tells me that it's not only high volume, but it's also high quality. And that helps me, for example, to try to optimize some of the activities and initiatives that I'm running, to find those indicators and to try to correlate them as much as I can.
Got it. You spoke before about obviously the different target audiences, the different types of personas that you have in mind when you're thinking about your product launches. Can you talk to me about the process of how you go about identifying and understanding who those audiences are that helps to inform those campaigns and those launches?
So I think that really is just a reflection of that kind of constant struggle that the go-to-market teams have, and that just companies have to try to refine their personas. I don't know that obviously you might have specific targets depending on the launch and specific campaigns that you run, but I think for the most part that's just going to reflect the general assumptions and the general understanding of your ICP, of your target audience, where you're going, right? Anything from the messaging to the channel that you're using. So, if you're targeting, if you know that these channels are where your audience is hanging out, you're probably going to be doing some sort of launch announcement that's centric around those things. You might expand it to other one-time launch platforms that we could talk about, but for the most part, it's going to resemble. It's gonna look like what you're working with already, even outside the context of the launch.
When you're thinking about ICPs, how granular are those ICPs, and are you grouping them into cohorts when you think about campaigns, or are you being very discrete and tactical in terms of we have a very specific message for this ICP and then executing that multiple times across different channels?
Yeah, so I think for the purpose of a launch, I generally don't. Sometimes I did try to make it more granular and try to use like a more experimentation, kind of a specific segmentation experimentation. I used it as an excuse to test, certain messages, certain things. But I think for the most part, the extent to which you can have that framework of understanding, hey, this is what I want to get out of it. So say, for example, if I have like a big announcement and I already know, more or less who my target audience is, and I know more or less the channels that I'm operating with, I might use different tactics to leverage those channels. But I will often want to go broad in that case to be able to get as much incoming traffic and attention as I can, without worrying too much about like the specific, because it's not an ad campaign, right? It's not like a specific landing page. The point here is to use this as a deliberate series of it's like a one-time series of actions to achieve that result. This is not going to be forever. It's not going to be a long-term thing. It's often going to be for a limited time. And so you don't want to limit both, time. The more limitations and parameters you put, the more limiting in scope the results are going to be. So,
how many ICPs are you considering at any one point in time when you're working on a product? I guess it depends on what the product is, but
totally depends on the product.
From your experience, what's the range?
You're talking about even outside the context of a launch, or look, I mean, I think it really does depend. I mean, it's easy. It's hard to say kind of theoretically. Let's take Livecycle as an example, right? So just to illustrate a couple of high-level considerations. So if we're a platform that enables development teams to collaborate kind of pre-release, so like we create this collaboration layer on top of a pull request and allow teams pre-release, pre-merge to be able to see previews quickly and give feedback and share feedback. So you could already see there that there's a couple of different personas that we're going to measure. It could be the individual engineer that's kind of the coder. That's one, benefits for him or her. There's benefits there. There could be an engineering lead who's responsible for the team. It could be higher up, a CTO or head of developer experience. And then it could be a product manager that wants to just get more visibility because they are not necessarily involved in the technicalities of the pull request. And then from there, you want to try to measure it one step further, which is like, okay, which context would potentially present the most acute pain point. So you can have a company profile that says, okay, you have a particular company profile that lends itself to having more of a expression of the pain point that you're trying to target, and then you try to connect the dots that way. I guess the point is that you're not, every company and every team already knows the context of hopefully what
Well, it makes assumptions.
the general boundaries of their focus, and that's
Yeah.
generally how you operate. I think it's okay to have multiple ICPs as long as you have a way to continue to measure and test and narrow it down.
What's interesting in the way you're describing it, it sounds like all your ICPs are kind of very bottom up. You're looking at people who are actually utilizing the products and then informing your ICPs of how you're going to go to market based on that usage. Is that a fair characterization?
So it's both. I mean, in terms of like a process, especially for an early stage company, I think it starts with both
Yeah.
bottom up and top down, and then you kind of meet in the middle. So you come with your assumptions in terms of like what we think the profile of the company, the use case, the the persona would look like, and you try to create that. And then also, as quickly as possible, and you can't overstate this, you speak to people. You have to, you speak to users, you speak to prospective users, you speak to people who are using competitive software or solutions. You try to understand what it is that they are trying to achieve, how they're trying to achieve it, how much do you feel that this pain is actually something that you need to solve immediately. And then with all of these inputs over time, you start to get a sharper picture of what it is that takes priority or where the opportunity might be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Shift gears a little bit just to think about the kind of the platform selection in regards to product launches. How do you think about the platforms that you're leveraging? How do you prioritize those when you approach a new product launch?
So this is a big question. And
we can dine out on it.
it's a big question. I think that, it starts with the categories that we talked about. That kind of that's a lot of it. Obviously, knowing your landscape of where your audience is going to be listening is another one. But also it depends on your kind of go-to-market strategy. So, for example, with Livecycle, we have employed for much of our time, we've employed a product-led kind of organic strategy, very content-heavy, and things of that nature. So I really was able to look at the channels that were at my disposal that were effective over time in general, and to really double down on those. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We looked at things like, we publishing blog posts on some of these syndicate platforms, so Dev2 and Hashnote and things of that nature. Social media is always a good one.
Yeah.
And there's a number of others. But actually, if I could, I want to zoom out and make one more observation. That is that a product launch is not necessarily limited to a particular activity or two. The way I like to think of a launch is that it's a layered kind of stacked set of activities that's going to put you in the best position to really drive the result that you're looking to achieve. So it's not necessarily about like, oh, is it specifically on YouTube or on social, or it's often a cluster of multiple platforms and engagements that you already are working with. And then in addition, adding a couple of disposable one-time events that we can dive deeper into, but finding those things to really, pour the gasoline on the fire to drive the engagement around.
Okay. I guess within that context, how do you differentiate between as well? So the platforms that you're utilizing on a regular basis versus those, as you described, disposable ones. Do you talk to me about the differences between them, how you think about the utility of each of them as well?
So let's start with the disposable ones for a moment.
Sure.
So you have certain platforms and certain also non-platforms, but I guess I call them opportunities that you can't use every day, but you can be really interesting in the context of the launch. So when I think of platforms for launching a product, I think of things like Product Hunt. I think things like Dev Hunt, for dev focused products. I think of things like Hacker News, has a show tab.
Yeah.
So those are items which, are really effective to have a deliberate, prepared lead up to a launch, make an announcement, promote it, get traction. Those are all things that that are kind of like one-time events, and that has, because of the fact that there's like an actual light switch where it's like, okay, now we're launching the product here. So you have a deliberate sequence of events leading up. You have the launch, and then you have the support and the ongoing, trickle effect afterwards. That's in terms of the disposable things. In terms of the other channels, so you have social blogging platforms. You might have some influencer marketing or other things that you use on a more regular basis. And so the way I think about those things in terms of launches, I want to continue to use those channels, but I want to use them in a a way during this same period that I'm using the disposable channels.
Yeah.
I want to find a way to make those two things complement each other. So let's say I might have a week where I'm launching a particular, version of the product or a particular feature. I will have a clustered set of content that I'm posting on some of these blogging platforms. I'm having an influencer promote those on the regular channels while I'm also launching on product hunt, and I might even have the product hunt announcement be segued over and have that promoted through those channels as well. So it's about having a cluster of content and combining both the one-time disposable opportunities together with the ongoing channels that you're using already.
I'm interested that the influencer marketing aspect, is that a network that's actively being managed at all times, or is that part of the kind of disposable marketing platforms available? Are you probably on an ad hoc basis, or are you cultivating and nurturing those influencer relationships at a
Right. So I'll talk about my own experience, and obviously, again, it's just when you talk about marketing, I mean, things are so vast and so in terms of the type of product. So let's take our example where we're talking about a developer-focused, product-led company product.
Yeah.
My experience has been based on the persona, right, that we're dealing with. I'm selling to a developer personality. Now, developers are, the reputation they have is for being very, very curious, very skeptical. They're not going. They want to see and play and touch things with their own hands. They want to be able to experiment and see it for themselves. They don't want to just take my word for it. And so, finding a way to build authentic trust with that audience really, really important. I found over time that I use the word influencer lightly because it's not like a TikToker who's like just showing off a perfume brand or a shoe brand. It's not that kind of influencer. It's an influencer
No.
based on.
I mean, we deal with the same ones at Packt, saying people who are trusted authority figures within the technical domain of the ICPs you're trying to reach, presumably, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So somebody who's really developed a relationship or a reputation for being an authority in this space, this discipline, exactly. And what you want to do is have them authentically present your tool, either whether you're paying them or not. You want to find a way for them to echo their, the value of your tool to their audience. So on the one hand, it is an ongoing thing, right? I have found that is one of the more effective, high stakes, high rewards. It's also high risk in the sense that sometimes it flops completely and you'll get no engagement from the influencer. But when it works really, really well. And so I have made that a kind of a pillar of our strategy, is trying to develop those relationships. And what I found is that not only should I be pursuing those things kind of on an ongoing basis, but if I can leverage some of those relationships to give potent, doses of boost, to a particular launch or launch announcement, it can really help kind of in the aggregate. It really helps the whole launch. If I look at the launch as like one unit of activities, it really helps to push things along. So it is something that I develop basis, but I do use those and leverage those things to boost content and to boost actual launch.
Outside of the kind of platform selection, a really important component seems to me the content strategy that kind of accompanies that. How do you think about what the right content strategy is during a product launch? And I'm particularly interested in the theme of kind of education and specific applications of your technology, because it's a developer audience, right? It's a developer products. And that's very different to any other kind of products in terms of what you need to create to motivate people to want to investigate, find out more.
Right. So I think that the goal has really got to be, there's a couple things I think about. Number one is, how do I start, moving the needle on these metrics that I have set for myself? So if I'm using content as a driver to get, let's say, to get people to click through and read a blog post. I want to use content as a way to drive a lot of traffic and to convert a whole high volume of that traffic to my site.
Sure.
So if I'm using it in that kind of way, which is not necessarily education, right? That's more of just like getting you interested, and I want you to. I might be very
piquing interest.
I might not even be talking about the product at all. I might come up with a series of things, and I'll share a couple of interesting examples. I might come up with a series of content examples that have nothing to do overtly with the product, but it just has a big fat CTA that's like, okay, I know this is going to perform well and maybe go trending. I want the people to come in. And oh, by the way, we've just launched this new version, this new feature. At the same time, you always want to think about, if I do get that qualified person inside of my kind of inside the front door, how do I get them to be able to easily take the next step in the journey that I want them to take?
Yeah.
So there is certainly a very deliberate focus on at least secondary education, right? It's like, okay, now I'm in the door. What are the questions that you're going to be asked? Does my landing page reflect this? Do I have that video, the documentation that's readily accessible to be able to answer those implicit questions? So there is a kind of a yin-yang relationship between getting the people to look at you and give you the attention, and at the same time, giving them the specific focus and educational, boost that they need in order to understand how to continue down the funnel.
Okay, but presumably there's a trade-off in that initial kind of acquisition funnel where you could have a really exciting and bold CTA that attracts a lot of traffic to your website, but attracts a lot of audience and unqualified people that aren't actually the types of individuals you're looking for. How do you calibrate what the right kind of CTA is? It's engaging enough, but it's also engaging to the right kind of audiences. It's not just going to fill your pipeline full of trash.
Right. So that already is like where you have to get a little bit more creative and strategic. So let's say, for example, and this is where I like to look at these things as like a two-dimensional or three-dimensional. It's more like a three-dimensional. Take a three-dimensional approach, not necessarily a one or two-dimensional.
Yeah.
So you have, let's say, if you think about it in terms of like your end result, you want people to use your product. You've got these platforms that are open for the for your use to promote all this stuff, and you can promote stuff on the launch platforms and the content. And then you've got kind of your idea of what you're trying to promote in the first place. To me, the way I like to think about it is, I don't necessarily need to jump from step 1 to step 3, right? It's not always like, okay, here's my product, sign up right now.
Yeah.
Sometimes what you can do is actually make the performance on these platforms the end result that you're looking for in the first place. So what I mean is, if I have a platform like a Dev2 or like a Product Hunt that have their, innate built-in mechanisms for promoting products on a trending page or on the as a top, top product of the week or, top post of the month. What I will sometimes do is take deliberate steps to make sure that I'm getting all of that spammy traffic and I'm getting all those likes, just to make sure that my product, or I should say my post or my content, is going to be featured by their mechanism. And then that allows me, if I'm doing a good enough job with the content and the CTA, to get such a high volume of traffic that inevitably I'm going to get the
like all the people you're actually interested in reaching.
That's one thing. Is not necessarily always worried about the bottom line. You want to make sure that if you're doing kind of a performance-oriented launch and a high volume kind of launch, you're not just focusing on optimizing from the first step, but you're actually just trying to optimize for that volume. That's okay. You don't have to apologize for it. In terms of the other stuff, how do you make sure that you're weeding out the garbage traffic? I think that really has to be a consideration in the content itself. So I'll give you an example. If we have a Docker centric product, we have targeting a Docker audience, I could find content and interesting initiatives to run that promote broadly to the Docker community, but I'm going to go heavily in the Docker community. I might not go wide to the web dev subreddit and get a trillion people. I might want to get more precise. So it's about just understanding what the different entry points are and what you're trying to achieve, and understand that it might be a multi-step process to get there.
I'm keen to understand. Have you ever flirted with kind of gated content as a mechanism for generating qualified leads by offering people content in a, like, say you're a Docker example, give them a free ebook on kind of containerization of Docker and using that as a method to attract leads? Talk to me about thoughts there.
Well, I guess it's a matter of taste. I don't know, and also a matter of it's not my taste, right? It's about the audience, and our audience that we're targeting doesn't seem to love the ebook thing, the white paper thing. In some enterprise cases and other industries, it might work well. For our audience, we learned pretty quickly that our target persona, the people that seem to resonate most with what we're building, They were just interested to like just show it to me. Let me try it in my own environment. I want to read. I want to. So we haven't done that, but there, in certain contexts, I could see that being effective.
Okay, yeah, so it goes back to what you're saying in terms of the ICP, what their preferences are, how they like to consume content. What's your underlying theory of use in regards to why somebody might not be interested in, say, an ebook, but would be interested in kind of trying things out for themselves? There's no right answer. This is all all just opinion.
It's a good question. I think it really, I think it really maybe depends on the nature of not just of the ICP, but of the product itself. So like if it's kind of like a quick fix here and now, the promise of the time to value is short, then you don't want to, the value of like some sort of theoretical ebook of teaching me how to do some complicated task is not going to match.
Yeah.
There's a mismatch there. If, however, you're talking in terms of like some heavy enterprise process or like highly theoretical or really complex rhythmic thing, then not just in terms of the product, but that reflects also the persona and the type of mindset that these people and teams have, and they are thinking in terms of architecture and theoreticals and heavy big problems, industry standards. And so to give them a set of closed locked statistics or studies or things that could be really interesting. So it's about kind of trying to parse out those instances from what you're.
Whereas you've got another group of people who just want to kind of get the job done. Oh, well, they've given us technology, plug it in, see if it works, and then move on.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Can you talk to me about an example of a product launch that didn't go as you anticipated, and whether what the kind of key learnings were in terms of how you've approached product launches since then? You have to talk about specific examples in a broad sense.
I laugh because there are so many. I think that every
learning opportunities, lots of learning opportunities. Yeah.
I think that every product launch, in a sense, you have to have fun with it, and you have to understand. Like, I'll say it like this, I have, I like to think of him as a friend. He's also a kind of a mentor in the space. Sean Wang, Swix, he's pretty popular in some of the dev communities. In a conversation I once had with him, he told, he reflected that, people put too much equity and importance on a launch or a launch. I mean, even the best launch in the world, is only going to be, so what, you're going to be trending on Product Hunt for a week, for a month. I'm saying even the best of the best of the best possible dream example is only going to give you a spike temporarily in your traffic and your engagement, and then it's going to taper off.
Yeah.
So I think that in that sense, that kind of gives people the license to look at launches as kind of like another series of experiments. It's not like, so it's almost impossible to fail with a launch, because by its very definition, launches are only going to be temporarily, impactful to begin with. The question is, how you use that and apply it. So for me, I think one of the things that I learned pretty quickly in some of my early launches, that I was thinking too much. And that I was trying to be, so precise with some of the things that you mentioned, with making my messaging exactly right and making sure that all of my channels were so in sync. And so, whereas if I took a more expansive view and I said, you know what, I can have a deliberate set of activities over, I don't like to look at it as one day. I usually like to look at it over the course of a week or so. Then I have the latitude to roll things out, give myself that margin for error, try to continue to adapt to achieve these kind of goals that we've talked about, which are like, okay, I just want to make sure that the volume is there of traffic and things like that. If it's not working on day 2 or day 3, what can we do to make it work on day 4, day 5? So I think that the main learning that I took from those first, failed launches is that I was being way too limited, especially with a niche product-led kind of approach. You don't want to limit yourself with overanalyzing what goes into the launch. You want to just make sure that you're using what works, making a creative plan, and then executing it quickly and broadly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, one of the things I'm also interested to hear, because the market around tech is so crowded now, is how do you ensure that your launch stands out across an ocean of other tech organizations that are all trying to launch their products at the same time?
So this is the $1 million question. But
How to be unique.
what's that?
How to be unique and how to be the one that stands out. Yeah.
Kind of unique, but I'll give you a couple of maybe vignettes or a couple of quick
Yeah.
examples of things that I've thought about. First is I'll say one general thing and one specific thing. Right?
Sure.
In general, I think that launches really get prepared even before you realize that they're getting prepared. So one of the things that I try to do in both in Livecycle, but also in other companies and organizations that I work with is I say, how can I develop not just a marketing approach and a kind of product strategy, but how do I develop growth levers that I can pull when needed, right? And that could be in the form of a number of things. That could be in the form of a Slack community or a newsletter. That could be in the form of a Discord server or something that you're building. That could be in the form of even social media engagement, right? So if you have a deliberate set of posts and people have engaged with you on social media and you have those people now that, ready to DM if needed, these are what I like to think of as growth levers that I can pull when needed in order to stand out in a sense, because I don't need to stand out more than my competitor or the next person. I need to stand out to be able to derive just enough to be able to derive the goal that I'm looking to get. So for example, those are the kinds of things that I really look to. Social media engagement is a really specific one, which I think is overlooked.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to do is to take Product Hunt, right? I launch a Product Hunt or another platform, and I'm depending on my upvotes. I need the engagement from the community to make me go trending as the product of the week. Well, how do I do that? So I can knock on a bunch of doors in my shared office space. I can send a bunch of emails. I can try to put some ad spend behind it. There's a million different ways to do it. One of the highest converting methods that I have found is going back to my last, 6 months of social engagement on my company profile, and to go through the people that really gave me some genuine feedback, either likes or engagement, and just DM them. Hey, Joe. Hey, Jane. Thanks for really. I see that you, or even if you didn't like my post, maybe you liked a post of that's related to the premise of my product. Hey, we just launched on Product Hunt. We're related to this thing. Would you mind giving us a quick upvote or star us on GitHub or something like that? And you would be surprised at how many people are just so ready and willing to convert with that really instant gratification kind of request. So that's one of the things that I learned to do the things that are not necessarily scalable, but do help me stand out in the short term.
Yeah, I guess if you focus on the scalable things, everybody's going to focus on the scalable things. The things that don't scale well, the bucket of things that are in the too hard camp, that's the stuff that's interesting, right?
Yeah, and I think that's also the nature of the launch, right? Because a launch by its very definition is not a scalable entity. I'm really just looking to optimize this week or next week. I'll give you another quick example, just something which was we did it almost as a joke, but it ended up being really effective for us. So there's this platform called DevHunt, which was kind of a product hunt alternative for developer-focused tools, and it's gained popularity. And they only take 15 tools a week. They heavily promote the top product or the top 3. So you're competing with the other 15. So you really want to stand out. And we're really thinking about how do we make, how do we put ourselves in the best possible position to do that in such a short time. So we did some of the things that we talked about and some other creative things which we can get into. But one of the things that I wanted to test, I said, well, what if I could create a series of podcasts or Twitter spaces and actually have the team from Product Hunt come onto my show and talk about Product Hunt, talk about the platform. I won't talk about my product. I'll just talk about their platform, and I'll give them free publicity. I'll get their community that they've built to get awareness about me, and then then I will be able to leverage that to then tell people about, oh, by the way, I've just launched on DevHunt, and why don't you give us a vote? I thought that would be kind of a clever approach, but they weren't interested, and they said, "No, we'll do it." But then I thought to myself, okay, let me try something else. I actually emailed the founder, and I did do you mind if I interview you? I just want to interview you, not in terms of the next space, but actually, I said I want to I'm writing a feature, on a blog or whatever about the startup. Not exactly how I spun it, it's something much more generic. And he was actually very willing to get featured about his journey and his thing. And it was totally genuine, above board.
Yeah.
He knew who I was in terms of launching our platform. I just timed the publication and promotion of that interview for my launch week. And so, without intending to do so or without knowing it, he actually was part of our go-to-market strategy or our launch strategy by helping to promote this article, which obviously referenced the fact that we were launching that week. And definitely, it was kind of like a win-win situation. I was happy to promote their platform. They were organically promoting our article. That helped us to go trending and promote our launch. So it was kind of about thinking, how can I best access and leverage the communities broadly that I'm operating in and get the result that I'm trying to.
Yeah, and presumably a lot of that is about how you're creating value for people that you, on one level, want to leverage. So it feels like a lot of what you were able to do successfully with the founder is create a proposition that's going to create value for him as well as you. And that was part of the success.
Exactly. And that is such I mean, honestly, I could spend the whole so just talking about that one sentence that you said.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the most important thing is the more that you stop thinking about yourself and your product, and you think about the other person, have that empathy and say, how can I add value to you and to your day and give you something that's going to be interesting for you? That just makes everything more effective and better. Social, content strategy, everything you do will be more effective if you're thinking about how can I add value to you, the listener, or the reader, and not thinking about yourself.
Yeah, that's something. I mean, I could also talk about it for another hour. So I'll also book in another session to talk about that specific theme, because I think there's a lot in that people neglect, and that's where things go horribly wrong. But thank you so much for your time today, all of the insight, all of the wisdom you've shared. It's been wonderful. And hopefully I'll be back on another point soon to talk about how to create value for people.
Okay, Oliver, I really do appreciate you inviting me on, and this was really great.
Great. Thanks, mate.